Last summer, when we started with the George Floyd protests and we started with the police accountability movement, some were in the defund the police movement. That wasn't me. I was part of the police accountability and reform movement. We started hearing from all sorts of corporations, we will be mandating all of our managers do implicit bias training. And at the time I said, and I've continued to say, to me, that really is actual virtue signaling. It's actual PR. It's actual optics. And there were two reasons I had for believing that. Number one, many of the corporations that were very loudly saying, we're going to do implicit bias training, also had histories of donations to political candidates that didn't really subscribe to the belief of holding police accountable and dealing with racism in this country, et cetera. And number two, the other critique I had of the implicit bias trainings was that it's not at all clear to me that training managers at Starbucks or whatever is really what's going to get at the root of the problem in the United States. Okay, that was my criticism then. We now have part two of this. As many of you may know, we are now in Pride Month here in the United States, Pride Month where we celebrate and respect inclusivity with regard to the LGBT community. I don't know exactly how they name Pride Month. I'm just sort of making this up as I go along. But it's a month about recognizing diversity and the importance of equality and respect and et cetera. And you have companies, and there's a great report on this in Business Insider. You've got Walmart, you've got McDonald's, you've got Amazon celebrating Pride after donating hundreds of thousands of dollars to politicians who voted against the Equality Act. These same three companies, Amazon, Walmart, and McDonald's, collectively donated more than $1 million to lawmakers who voted against the Equality Act. Now, in February, the vast majority of Republicans in the House of Representatives voted against the Equality Act. The Equality Act the goal was to expand LGBTQ protections. And if you look at SEC filings, you will see that a lot of the best known companies in the United States, and that includes the ones I mentioned, donated a whole bunch of money to politicians who voted against the bill. Now, most companies donate to both political parties. You look at, Comcast, you look at these big ISPs, you look at a lot of the big social media platforms, you look at all of it. Most of them are donating to both sides. Why? Well, it's sort of obvious. You don't know as a corporation which way the political winds are going to go. You could get involved and try to get, if you think Democrats are better for your business, you could say, let's try to get Democrats involved only. But then what if it doesn't happen? You're in a pretty awkward position as a company that wants to affect lobbying and legislative power over members of Congress, et cetera. So you just donate to both sides, and then whoever wins, wins, and then you've got hopefully friends regardless. And this is exactly what is going on here. And, I don't mind. I think it's a great thing if from a marketing perspective, it's better to be pro-equality than anti-equality, right? Like, put the money out of it for a second. If you just say to me, would you prefer a country in which saying we celebrate Pride Month is good for business, rather than a country in which saying no gays allowed is good for business? Of course, the country in which it's more profitable to be for equality is the country that I prefer. But these companies are just doing this for business reasons. In the companies, there's no doubt that you would be able to find homophobic people and people who are for LGBT rights and are inclusive and welcoming and for equality and all of that. But a corporation, one of the things about it is that it takes on different dynamics than simply the sum of the opinions of the individuals who make it up. And this is how you get corporations that end up doing completely immoral and horrible things. If you individually talk to the people at a lot of these companies and say, hey, would you ever authorize the known pollution of a river with carcinogenic whatever? It'd be hard to find individuals who say, yeah, that would be fine with me. But you end up with a corporation where roles and responsibilities are compartmentalized, and you end up with corporations doing things, or at least looking away as things are done, that individually many of these people would not do. Much the same way, you could have homophobic and LGBTQ inclusive people at a corporation. And of course, Amazon does. And of course, McDonald's does at their stores. And of course, Walmart does. There's no doubt about it. But then as a corporation, you would say, what is best for the bottom line? And what's best for the bottom line right now is you celebrate Pride Month brazenly and cynically from the perspective of what you really believe as a company, but you keep the money flowing to the anti-gay elected officials because the tide could turn and they could end up in power. Now, should you consider this in deciding whether to do business with Walmart or Amazon or McDonald's? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know the answer to that because certainly the fact that they're at least celebrating Pride Month rather than taking a homophobic position is preferable. But at the same time, if it really came down to it and their profits depended only on anti-gay politicians, then what would your position be? What would their position be on Pride Month, by the way? So I don't know. My approach in thinking about what companies I do business with is if I'm doing business with a small business, I do sort of pay attention to, if there's 3 owners, there's restaurants I've found out have completely xenophobic owners. And I've stopped going to that restaurant. With a company like Amazon or Walmart, I haven't been in a Walmart in 15, 20 years or something like that. It's less about the individuals because there's so many individuals. And I think it's a really personal decision. I don't really have any advice on that. But the exact same cynicism with which I saw the implicit bias trainings being rolled out over the summer and into early fall last year, we're seeing the exact same thing from these companies celebrating Pride Month while under the table, or but not under the table, behind the scenes, donating to elected officials who are disgusted by the concept of Pride Month. Let me know what you think about how you decide whether such a company is one that you want to give your hard-earned dollars to. I'm curious to hear from you, and we'll have more on this on our Instagram account. You can find us on Instagram at David Pakman Show. If you want to see me at the beach over the weekend for a break from politics, follow me on Instagram at david.pakman.